Okay. So I will ask a question. You all talked a lot about how we include our students, whether it be background, language, kind of how do we include them? What would you say for someone who wants to do that, but maybe their admin or their supervising teachers and kind of their mentor teachers aren't really open to that? They get a little pushback from the senior members at their school. How do they do that as a new teacher?
I'm happy to jump in first if you are okay with that. So one of the things that I always work with teachers on is use the language of the people that you're trying to persuade, right? So if you want to talk about being more inclusive in your schools and you're getting, so for example, one of the pushback areas could be like for the program that I run, the Pathways to Teaching. I'm unapologetic that there's no GPA. So I don't want to, have any barriers for students to take a college level class in high school, so no GPA. Now, that's one place where I might get some pushback because, for example, University of Colorado, Denver, or any of the universities I work with might say, but we need to have students in that class that have a 3.0 or a 2.78. The pushback that I'm going to give them is I'm going to do my homework and be prepared, and I'm going to read that university's strategic plan, their mission and their vision, or in the case of a public school employee, what's the mission and vision of your district? And almost always there's going to be language about being inclusive, about valuing diversity. So you use the language that districts or universities say they believe in, and use that language to persuade and say, this is what we've said we value, and this is one way that we can demonstrate that we value that. So do your homework and use their own language to fight them.
I would also add, in addition to that, I did get pushback from my principal at the school that I'm currently at. He's afraid that having students investigate the most fundamental issues in their lives and the struggles that they're going through would lead to a lot of calls to CPS in my school. So the way I have approached it, instead of research projects and school-wide surveys and interviews with families, is to start with a little curricular unit. So it doesn't have to be huge. It could be something small. And also, I've gotten really good at, I think I mentioned this in my first session, teaching within the box. Like, I'm really good at what my principal thinks a good teacher is. And now I can start pushing a little, pushing. And it's a journey. It takes time. And he supports me as a teacher, and he says, I would never question you. Like, he trusts me, and he knows that my best intention and all my effort, 100% of me, I'm all in for my kids. And so now he's more comfortable with letting me explore those things outside of his box.
I think there's many different ways to answer this question, so I'll add to and expand what we've heard so far. I think a lot of my perspectives working for the Nevada Department of Education are shaped within the education system itself, and just like we're looking for leveraging the strengths and the assets that our students and their families bring to our classroom spaces, I would recommend understanding what are the strengths and perspectives of your admin so that you can come to them in a positive way and really leverage that as you're seeking to persuade. And then in addition to that, looking at what are the barriers, and the principal that I work with as an interventionist in a K-12 bilingual education program, that's my part-time job. It's just 8 hours a week, but that's where I find all of that relevance in practice, in the classroom, with my students. And she always describes, I listen regularly to the principal there, and she's like, oh, there's this red tape, there's this reason, there's this reason, there's this reason. So just thinking through, just like we have our administrators who help guide us, they have a specific set of responsibilities that they're also working to maintain. And whether you agree or disagree with their perspective, if they're your supervisor and your administrator at that school setting, you do have to learn to work through whether you perceive it as conflict or not. You have to learn to work within those parameters so that you can bring those into your classroom and so that they don't become barriers in your classroom as well. And then a second thing here is looking to the other teachers at your site. So develop relationships with other teachers and with the paraprofessionals, because if you're new to the site, then they may have tips, or that they may know and have a different understanding of background and context in the way that some of those histories have shaped the culture of any given school. And in that way, you can have a mentor and really work towards what is the best way to overcome that as a barrier in any unique situation or setting that you find yourself.
Awesome. We have another question online. We have a couple of them, so I'm going to kind of give you the synopsis of them. They are asking about this idea of advocacy and social justice in classrooms with young children or those with severe learning disabilities, how to provide a voice for those. And so the examples are those with severe learning disabilities, very young elementary students, or those with a very high language barrier. How do you go about advocacy and making a voice for those who can't or aren't able to really speak for themselves?
I'll let you all go first this time.
So one of my mentors, he started a school of his own, and he started with kindergartners, and I think they're now in their 8th grade year, so it's now a K through 8 school. And they were doing a lesson on food, and the way, I forget exactly what it was, but they were studying like inequitable food practices and how stores were carrying these certain products that were produced inequitably or something to that effect. And the young people, the kindergartners, went to their local store and started like protesting, and they advocated for their neighborhood store to stop carrying that product. And whether the store stopped carrying the product or not, I'm assuming that they did not stop carrying the product. Maybe they did. But it's beginning to develop that sense of agency in 5-year-olds that they will then build upon as they continue through their educational career and lead to bigger things.
I love this question, first of all. My background being in early education, 1st through 3rd grade, really a lot of almost all, in fact, of the early learning strategies are truly focused on teaching the students to use their voice and empowering choice in the classroom. So I'm going to say that is my top recommendation. They may not be taught it as the term advocacy or social justice, but you can bring those terms in and they can learn them and understand them. They're definitely capable of being in a learning environment that you carefully set up to promote that way of thinking and to really empower children in understanding that they do have a voice. And so if you think about your traditional primary grade setting, so let's focus on K through 3rd, if you have the teacher in the front of the room or next to the whiteboard or just kind of stays in that one area, then talks at the kids, then they don't ever have any choice in what's happening to them or for them. The one doing the talking is the one doing the learning. And so at that point, it's the teacher who's just repeating and repeating, and the students are just sitting there and it's being done to them. So doing things with the students and allowing them the choice in their learning, and it looks different in every classroom. And a lot of administrators actually do have a hard time coming into an early childhood classroom and being like, oh, it's very chaotic in here. Oh, it's very loud in here. Or, oh my goodness, what are they learning? But you can design your learning settings so that you can show your administrator and find that balance, because it's also important to show the parents that too. Many parents have their children in school, A, because it's a requirement, but B, because they hope for the best for their children, and they've entrusted them to your care in that moment. And in this situation, it's educational care. And so all learning domains can be set up in a way that does empower children's choice, whether you're going to use centers and teach them only 5 here. Look, this center is full. Let's look at these ones here that are open, instead of a rotation. Like here, you must do this worksheet here, you must do this puzzle here, you must do this, and then you've got 10 minutes to do each one. But if you teach them that this center is open, let's say blocks, which are very developmentally appropriate for our early settings, if they're in the block center, they can build, they can hit a whole bunch of early learning standards and our content standards just through the block center. They can do math, they can do science, they're going to be developing social skills. You could have it as social studies, they could be building buildings, you can talk about like cities and a whole bunch of different things that can just come from empowering them with a learning style. And those who may be drawn towards the block center might not really love the art area, but empowering them to have that choice, because if you set up the learning setting in that way, you can still do it in a way that meets your curriculums, meets your administrators' needs. The state certainly supports you in setting up these environments, and I can give you details on those later. But I'll pause there. You can absolutely bring advocacy and social justice by creating that community culture with your students and empowering their choice in their learning.
So in addition to what's already been shared, just briefly, I'm a longtime special educator. So the question around how do we empower and get students with disabilities really as activists too, the first thing is letting students understand the laws that are there to protect them, and making sure that students become experts in the IDEA and the other special education laws. And the more that they can become experts in the law, and sadly, a lot of teachers aren't, then they can make the demands of the things that they need to be successful. And the very first thing I would do is to make sure that any student in the school that has an IEP participates in their IEP meeting. So instead of having a group of adults plan for somebody's educational future while they're in school or after school, those students absolutely need to be part of making that plan. So that would be one real solid way to get students who have IEP and are getting special ed services to participate. The early childhood, I mean, your example was brilliant in terms of, students learning about a particular issue in their community and then demanding a change. I love that. Young children are very open to wanting to make sure that their voices are heard if they're given the opportunity. So I think your example was just, right on target with that. Mm-hmm. So thanks for the question. Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
So today we've talked a lot about a lot of people that come from more like underprivileged communities that have often, been put in places where they get told no a lot and they have very low expectations placed on them. And because of their failure to succeed in, say, earlier grades, now in later grades, they are looked at in a very, the lens of oh, you couldn't do it then, why would you be able to do it now? And so I feel like there's kind of this, they just fall into the pit of no one believes in them, no one is there to inspire them or to show them that they can do it and they are capable of, succeeding at very high levels academically. And so I was wondering what you guys thought about when you get a child in your class that has always been told no, you can't do it, you're not smart enough, your situation just makes it so you're not capable of this. How do you inspire that child to be an advocate for themselves and to give them a voice in their own education and to make it so that they feel like they totally can succeed and they can participate in projects like the ones that you guys have shared with us today?
So first, I think you have to, it has to be developmentally appropriate, right? So from all over your classes that students are going to be ready for different things at different times. So obviously it has to be developmentally appropriate. But all students need to know that they can be successful. And I think for some of the older kids in particular, I love introducing them to scholars of color, right? Like, who are the big experts out there in the field that are talking about this exact thing? So, for example, I would direct you to an article written by my colleague and friend, Dr. Donna Y. Ford, F-O-R-D. She writes a lot about students of color, the underrepresentation of students of color who get placed in gifted programs and advanced placement programs and IB programs, and yet they're overrepresented in special education programs. Why is that? Are black and brown people more inherently predisposed to having learning disabilities? Hell no. They're there because of a bias system and because of teacher biases, right, in terms of low expectations for certain populations of students. So I would become familiar with some of the literature that shows that and the studies that show that and the videos that demonstrate that, and let students see that and open some discussion about it. And really, you know, that imposter syndrome that I talked about before is real, and it starts at young ages when young people start believing the things that the explicit messages and implicit messages that they're getting about what people believe in them. So I would, you know, certainly bring that to their attention.
And in my experience in teaching, I really find that when I always have high expectations for my kids, they rise to the expectations every single time. And sometimes the kids who are the most challenging, or, you know, at my school they call them the heavy hitters, the ones that end up in APEP or like the suspension room, those are the ones that end up doing the best and have the most powerful messages when you give them the tools, and then they get to describe their reality in a way that is aimed towards social change. They're the most powerful ones. You know, the one girl that I talked about that had everyone growing up calling her, you have a bad mouth, you have a foul mouth. She was the most articulate and powerful speaker that we had when we went on these national conference tours. And some of the teachers that I see that are the most powerful are the ones that were almost dropouts or did drop out and then went to get their GED and then went to junior college and then went to college and grad school. Those are the most powerful teachers. So those kids that have been seen as troublemakers or have had low expectations, that's where I see the most powerful growth. So always have high expectations of them. And call their parents and let them know when they're having success, or their guardians, because then they get even more powerful in your classroom.
And I'd take it one step further, encourage them to become teachers.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice, yeah.
Yes.
I think flipping our mindset, because we hear so often, like, there's at-risk groups, there's our, you know, we do have underrepresented, but if we can think of those children and students as not children at risk, but children of promise, then what can they do? And just flipping that simple narrative in the way that we approach any connection that we have with them and with their families. I love holding some of that accountability, and you really have to know and develop. You have to know your students, and you have to take the time to develop that relationship with them, because if they don't trust you and can come to you with some of that, whether it's low confidence or, hey, I've been told this my whole life, then you won't be able to impact change in their life. So you have to build the confidence and make a connection with them, and you can do that through developing strong relationships with them, having your, always looking for their strengths. And you can do that by observing and noticing, even if it seems like something ridiculous, like focus on something good that they do and then point it out to them. Say, hey, I noticed this and I really think that's a great asset, and teach them that they have those things. So when you're working with teenagers in high school or preteens in our middle school settings, they may already be coming to us with a lot of that lack of self-confidence or lack of motivation because of their lived experiences. So we need to understand what are those funds of knowledge and funds of identity that they bring to us so that you can make a meaningful connection with them. And you may not be able to make that connection with every single student, but you better darn well try. And just really bring their strengths to the forefront, because it is developing that confidence that can empower them. Even with Greg's story, who's still not in college yet, he's still working on that, and that's okay. That is still a strength that he has, because you can say, look at all of the things, whether it's a teeny tiny one little thing, or if it's that they're able to impact change on a massive scale. So just always looking for the best that there is.
This is actually more of a comment than a question. First of all, I want to thank you all for your work. And I'm so grateful that our teacher candidates get the opportunity to engage in these conversations. And what's resonating with me, first of all, with you all, is the assets-based approach versus the deficit. That's a pet peeve of mine. And I think, growing up, my family used to always say word, sound is power. And so I like, for example, our first presenter, I like how you, and I'm saying the end, I'm sorry, I can't remember, Rachel, how you were just talking about the emphasis of moving from English learner to multilingual learners. And a word that I've been recently resonating on is culturally resilient versus marginalized populations. So I just say that to say that our words are powerful, and how do we create word walls with our children to define themselves? And I believe personally with my 7-year-old black child who's going to public schools, one of the things that we do is positive affirmations, because it allows her to define who she is and her strengths. So I just encourage you all today for us to remember that, allow our students to define who they are and put those words powerfully around the room to remind them of their communities and where they're coming from.
Absolutely.
So online, we've had a couple of questions about parents. So we're going to go into a parent segment. One of the first ones is, how do we invite parents into our classrooms and work with parents, specifically with language barriers, or who have maybe a differing opinion in terms of advocacy? Like, how do we work with them with language barriers, but also how do we help them become better advocates for their students?
So if you don't mind, I'll jump in
please.
just quickly. So the first thing I would say is, when we talk about language barriers, who's got the barrier? Is it them or is it us, right? So I would first encourage our teachers and our staff and schools to be multilingual, so that we can start thinking it's really our barrier that we're not speaking, or that we're not at least semi-fluent in the languages of our students. And many schools have representation from multiple countries, so I'm certainly not suggesting that you learn 10 languages, although that might be fun. But certainly to try to, to meet the families where they are, and learn the culture and learn their language. And I think also to understand where parents are coming from. And I know that I don't remember in which session, whether it was the keynote or in the breakout, but we've got families that make huge sacrifices so that their students can be in your school with you, right? Huge sacrifices, financial sacrifices, in some cases their life, putting that on the lines that they can be with you. So I think it's always important for us to try to be empathetic and understand where the parents and families are coming from and the sacrifices that they've made, and entrusting you with their children, right? So that's where I'm going to stop now, but that's my biggest piece of advice, I think.
Go ahead.
There's so much to unpack in this question, so we could probably go in lots and lots and lots of different ways to approach an answer here. I'm going to start with 2 resources. One of them is the state of Nevada has a birth through grade 12 family engagement framework that's designed for educators to go to, and it's laid out with principles across the nation that are research-based that can help guide you in family engagement. And then it is also accompanied by a toolkit that shows some of those high-impact strategies And then another piece here is knowing your communities. So your community at large, which could include where you live, and it could include your neighborhood, and it most certainly includes your school setting, and definitely your classroom. So you can look at that from many different levels. So how does your school approach family engagement, and really having a good understanding of that vision of how parents are welcomed into the school? What paperwork do they need to fill out to be a volunteer in the classroom if that's an option for them? If that's not an option for them, what are the other options? Because we know that not all families can come during the whatever time of school day is, your 6 or 7 hour time of the day. They may or may not be able to make it. So then it's on you to think of what other strategies are teachers with me at my site, and what else does our school have available in resources to help maximize families engaging with you in all of their children's education. Lots and lots of research shows that if you do have high family engagement, and how you define family can be whether it's your foster family or if it's your immediate family, if it's a kinship situation where you're living with other family members. If you don't have that strong family or mom or dad leader in your family, family can look in so many different ways, and it doesn't have to look just in the traditional way that we have it. So thinking through your perspectives on how can family engagement become a very critical practice to your classroom community. The second resource is the state has a language access plan as well, and that talks about the different languages that the state is required to provide translation for, and then how that impacts each of your school settings and the local education agencies if you're a part of the district or if you're working with a school charter. There's lots of different ways that we can support translation, and that doesn't have to be on you. There are many professionals that our local education agencies have at their disposal to bring to you. So that's another thing there. Lastly, as a parent myself, you can't underestimate the importance of creating that welcome community within your classroom setting. I mentioned that I work part-time, and this is at my kids' elementary school. And there's still classrooms teachers who I work with, where I'm like, oh, I didn't quite experience that the same way as I do as part of your classroom as a staff member and part of your classroom as a parent. And so really empowering your parents in their perspectives, in their desires and hopes for their children, you have to ask them that. And so if there are, I love that you said, who's the barrier for when it comes to language? Because there's many different strategies that you can pull from to bring parents into your classroom in any of their languages, whether that means you're going to initiate that by translating something on Google Translate, or if you need an interpreter to come to your room, or if you are willing to take that step and begin to learn a few of those important phrases, you can bring the families in and help you with that. You could make it a classroom activity and really just enhance the overall learning setting that you're in charge of creating.
I would add the most powerful parent advocacy experiences I've had is when I really actually go out into the community and get to know those families. For example, I had a student who, one of the students who did research on the school to prison pipeline, he was interested in that because his brother was incarcerated. His mother struggled. She worked really hard. She was a single mom. And he was in and out of suspension a lot of times. And so I would collect his homework from all his teachers. I'd take it to him at his house and sit down with his mom. And we'd go over things. And I gained her trust. She knew she could come to me. Even if I didn't know the answer, she knew she could come to me and I would help her find the answer. So breaking bread with families, letting them know that you love their child unconditionally no matter what, and you're there for them, makes them open up to you in ways that maybe they otherwise wouldn't. And I still, 15, no, like I guess it's been like 8 years since I've been teaching this child, and his mom recently contacted me about, I want to do this program. She wants to do some training, so she trusts that I have her and her child's, I have the best intentions for them, and they can come to me. And if you put that yourself out there like that, they'll open up to you in ways that they wouldn't otherwise.
I just want to add one more thing to that, too, because when we talk about parent involvement and parent advocacy, we're really coming at it from a very white Eurocentric definition of what that looks like and what the expectations are. And we can't hold those expectations for all families. It's culturally mediated, right? So there are some cultures where parents and families really believe their role is not to be involved in school because you're the expert in education and I have to leave that space to you. Mm-hmm. So we have to do a better job of understanding what the family's perspective is and not impose our expectations on them, and to really understand it and understand how this is all culturally mediated in terms of what we're expecting from families too.
Well, that took my...
Can I ask a question of you guys? It is just, this always fascinates me because the perspectives really change. If anybody in here does have children of their own. Okay, so you can leverage those experiences as well and share them with those of us who did not raise their hands, because sometimes those lived experiences, the reasons why lived experiences become lived expertise is because you are doing that day in and day out, and the parents are very highly impacted by everything that you do with their students in the classroom, whether that's building their confidence or assigning a whole bunch of homework that they don't understand why would I need to do all of this, right? So it really looks different, and so you, again, can't underestimate the power of each family's unique situation, which it's a lot to learn, and that is a lot to take in. There are many, many demands on educators, and being able to prioritize that one in effort to create that trusting community and being able to best serve the families in your care at any given time is very, it's hard to do, but it's a very important step.
My question is, I feel like nowadays education has done a lot when it comes to teaching our multilingual students. I come from a time far back where we were ESL students. And being an ESL student, you were given an IEP, which you didn't have any learning disability, you just couldn't speak the language. And now today, as a pre-cert teacher, we have full classes on just how to, teach our multilingual students. What do you guys think is the one thing that still needs to be pushed as teachers wanting to go into the classroom to help those students?
I think expanding beyond monolingual perspectives. The English-only perspective, and the reason why a lot of those, reasons behind how a lot of those English as a second language and limited English proficiency, English language learner, they are all centralized in English. And so part of it, again, begins with that mindset shift for empowering multilingual learners and all children and families in their home language and in their home or in their language identity. I can't even go into how critical that is. So you do go through so many trainings, but even those are still emphasizing English, and adopting translanguaging pedagogies and practices in your classroom is really where you can empower your students to access everything that they know. We ran out of time during my first session here, but in the smaller session, we did have a little bit more time to unpack that, so I'll share it again here. But when we looked at the image that was the heart, and it said, Rachel, you are the best, and then it said, Señorita, eres el mejor maestra. There was a lot in that little note that that first grader delivered that we could have pointed to as deficit, and that we could have said, oh, these are, this is what you're good at in English and you're terrible at everything else, right? Those perspectives are harmful, and they come from that English, I don't even know the right word. They just come from that perspective. And if you can shift your own mindset, then you will begin to notice the strengths. And so in hers, she spelled the word you as Y-U. And to our English brain, we think at first that she just misspelled Y-O-U. But if you look at that from understanding of Spanish, the Y sound makes the, she had the Y sound from the English ya, and she had the vowel was coming from Spanish, because the vowels in Spanish don't change like they do in English. They are a, e, o, and u, unless you've got diphthongs and other combinations. But she just put that u. She didn't make it If she was using English phonetics to create that u, she would have written it differently. So just analyzing what they can do and empowering them. That, for her, it was Spanish, and that does take a little bit of research on part of the teachers. If you know the languages that your children come from, their heritage languages, their home languages, then you have to take ownership of that and how it impacts your classroom, so that you would understand how that may surface if it's a home language of French. How may it surface if it's one of our native languages that may not have a formal written system in the same way that English does. And how may you see those things? Doesn't mean you have to become fluent in the language, but it does mean you have to pay attention to what are the similarities, what are the differences that you may see coming forward in the way that your students are communicating their knowledge. So they're demonstrating knowledge. That's all students do in the classroom setting. They're showing you what they know. And if you only allow them to show what they know in English, then you are only ever going to get to know that part of them.
So just something for you to think about. Some parents pay $40,000 or $50,000 a year tuition at private schools so that their child can exit that school being bilingual or trilingual. Okay? Right, it is crazy. But so when we're talking about affluent multilingualism, it's very different perspective than when we're talking about our public school students, and then all of a sudden multilingualism is a deficit because you're not English proficient, right? So that's one of the things that I love to bring to students' attention is there are some parents that are paying $40,000 a year and you already speak 2 languages, and that's what they want their child to do. So it's really the framework that we look at it, right? And the other thing is too, letting young children know that by being multilingual, they are already in a system that they're far advanced than many of the teachers they're going to come into contact with for the rest of their lives, right? You know, unfortunately in the United States, most of our teachers are monolingual English speakers versus, you know, you can look at other parts of the world and teachers know several languages. So, but that whole notion of looking at it from a different perspective, that in the affluent community, you can pay $40,000 to be bilingual. Whereas, you know, in our public school systems, it's really considered your English limited, right?
Can I add to that again, super quick? Sorry, I love that as well. And when it comes to many of our Spanish-speaking families, they have come here and sacrificed so much, and I'm saying Spanish because it's the dominant second language here in not only our country, but in Nevada. And they are worried that their students won't learn English because they know that, or that it's part of their perspective and part of their upbringing that their student needs to speak English to be successful. And that cannot come at the sacrifice of losing their home language too. So it's a little bit of education both ways there to find out what the families are comfortable with. What do they want? Because we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but until we have our families on board with us, then the success and the outcomes for our students won't be like bridged, if that makes sense.
And I would just echo the strengths-based approach, looking at students' language as a strength and always bringing their life into the curriculum because they are experts on that, and allowing them to critically examine that in the classroom space as part of the academic English work.
So you all have said something, well, you said lots of wonderful things, but there's lots of questions online, and I would imagine possibly in the room as well, about feeling a little overwhelmed. Everyone here is either a first-year teacher or going into the classroom, not yet there, and there's this question of, I can't possibly do all of these things and teach the curriculum. What do I do? As a first-year teacher, what do you suggest for a first-year teacher of, like, where do they start? And how do they not feel like they're failing their students? How do they not feel overwhelmed? And how do they not burn out before they get started, feeling like they have to do all of this? So where does a first-year teacher start?
From my perspective, a first-year teacher has to start with examining their strengths, okay, their own strengths. What did they bring to the classroom that will really enhance the lives of their students? That first year is hard. I mean, there's no way around it. It's a really, really challenging year. So I really encourage you to concentrate on some self-care, to really concentrate on taking care of yourself. And really don't beat yourself up at the end of the day if you've made mistakes. Even veteran teachers that have been in the field for decades make mistakes. I make mistakes, right? So to just concentrate on yourself, your positive attributes that you bring to the classroom, get to know your students as individuals, get to know the families, and then worry about being the expert in everything later, you know, one thing at a time, but take care of yourself. And use lots of hand sanitizer so you don't get sick.
And find a good lotion.
Yeah, I mean,
Teaching is such an art, you know, it's a craft, and it takes years. It takes forever. It'll take my whole entire career to get good. I mean, my principal says I'm a master teacher, but I have so far to go. Be kind to yourself. Forgive yourself. Give yourself rest. Reflect on your day and take action the next day. You know, there's these little things that are going on in my classroom that are bugging me, that are keeping me up at night. And I type it into my phone real quick, and I say I'm going to address that the next day. And I always come at my students from a place of unconditional love, and they know I care about them. So what I'm saying to them is because I love them, and so then they tend to listen if they know I care. If they don't know I care, then they don't care what I'm teaching about, right? They have to know that I care about them and their families and their community. Be forgiving to yourself. You're not going to be perfect on the first day, and most of us are here because we're like perfectionists, right? Yeah. And so we're our own biggest critic. You're going to do great, and you take things one thing at a time, and you work on it in little chunks. Break it down, break it down, break it down, reflect, act, right? And it's like this constant process. One of my mentors told me, identify, analyze, plan, implement, evaluate. And it's not a circle, it's like a spiral. What is the problem? Why is it a problem? What am I going to do about it? Okay, let's go into the classroom tomorrow and do something about it, and then evaluate. How did that go? And then again and again and again and again. And make friends with other teachers that you can talk to in a positive way about your students. Don't get dragged into the drama. And just, you know, love yourself and forgive yourself.
and I would add one other thing too. So we're always asking, you know, we're always talking about assessment and evaluation. Why can't you just sit, even if it's kindergarten or preschool or 12th grade, and at the end of a lesson or the end of the day or the end of the week, ask your students, how did I do? You know, what was good? Remember that math lesson? Did you get it? And, you know, I noticed a lot of you didn't understand it. Why? What could I do differently next time? So get feedback from your students. Don't always wait for your principal to come in and evaluate you. Get your feedback from the people that you are working with and for. So ask them. They'll be kind.
Yeah. I think when it comes to the overwhelm, that is no small feat to overcome and to work towards overcoming. So just like we would encourage our students to have a growth mindset, when we come in with the attitude, I cannot possibly do all of this, I can't. Even if the thought crosses our mind, that's okay. Our students, thought crosses their mind too. But have the growth mindset to say, I can't do this yet, or I'm struggling with this now. And then again, try again. I shared this in the smaller group setting, but let them see you fail. You can narrate that to them if you want. Wow, I saw that happening a little bit differently, or that didn't quite go the way that I had planned. Let's regroup. How can we solve this together, right? So really, you can bring their learning experience into those failures, and if they can see you doing that, they'll do that too. So you can essentially model failure so that they can also know how to fail and how to overcome that. And then the challenge of time and curriculum pacing is no joke. The school day is short, and the compensated planning time is just as short. And so really being careful with your time. So when we talk about self-care and wellness, that applies to some of the strategies that you may be developing now as a student. Pay attention to what works for you so that you can bring those things into the classroom if you anticipate overwhelm. Think of, oh my goodness, I had this paper to write and I was working on this assignment and I felt really overwhelmed. What did I do in that moment? So you can pay attention to those learning styles right now. That way, when you're feeling overwhelmed in the classroom, you can already have a set of strategies that works specifically for you. And then the connection to curriculum and expectation around how can we do all of this when we're required to use the curriculum, where we're required to do so many things. I think learning a bit about what wiggle room do you have? Does your administrator expect you to take out that lesson book and read the script to your students, or do you have the wiggle room to be able to come and deliver that lesson in a different way, that you can look within the curriculum and you can think to yourself, oh, I know I have a student in my classroom who's fascinated with reptiles. I know that he could probably help me with this lesson. So give them some of that space where you can empower your students and their expertise within your confines of the curriculum itself. The curriculums are always going to come and go, but your teaching style and how you use them in your classroom, as you develop that, it can help to ease the overwhelm so that you can use it as a tool instead of a boss or a regulator.
This could be the last question, so I kind of been holding it. But a lot of us are going to be finishing up this year. I know that I graduate spring 2024, and I'm so excited about it. But I want to know, like, what should I look for when I'm applying into schools? I need to know, like, where I'm going to be successful because I'm learning all these things through NYPER. And I want to go to a school that I can implement these things, and I'm not in a school now, so I have that opportunity. So just like, what kind of questions should I be asking, and what should I be looking for?
I'm going to start that one, if you don't mind. Teachers are in high demand. You are a hot commodity. So if you don't feel that the fit is right for you, you do not have to take that job. There are many places to go. You may have preferences of like, oh, I want to stay in my neighborhood, or I want to stay here, but be willing to learn. And the interview that you'll do with your administrator, use it and leverage it just as much as an interview for them. So you can pay attention, and I hope that Dr. Bianco and Hidalgo can also share some of those specific questions, but know your value going in, even if it's your first job, even if it's your first teaching job. We desperately need you in the field, and so use that to your advantage if you need it.
I have a whole lot to say about this. So the first thing is when you go for your interview, or even before you go for your interview, try to get to know the community, right? But also speak to teachers that are working at the school already and ask them about the culture and the climate in the school, so that you'll know that before you even go in for the interview. If you're not going to be working in a place where you feel supported, especially those first couple of years, it's not going to do you any good, because you may end up leaving the profession sooner than we'd like for you to leave. So make sure that you talk to teachers, get an understanding of the climate. During your interview, I would ask, if at all possible, could you meet with students and have like a little student session and talk to the students about what they like about their school, what are the challenges of their school, what would they like to see done differently at their school, so that you're getting some student voice in helping you make your decision. Definitely speaking to the other teachers. You know, the leadership, unfortunately, leadership has changed, you know, they change. So we have high attrition rates. So the principal that may hire you might not be there 2 years from now. So I would also look to see what's the longevity of the leadership within the school, because you want somebody who can enact a vision that they have, right? And hopefully that'll give you some good insight into the school. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is talking to other teachers. But be careful too, right? So you might speak to teachers who are going to be naysayers about everything. That's not going to be a realistic impression of the school. So speak to a variety of people so that you get, you know, so that you can really determine like the honesty of. If everybody's telling you they're unhappy there, I would probably not go for the interview. Yeah.
So when I interviewed for the job that I have now, I was worried. It was a different school setting than I was used to. I wasn't sure if my principal would support my teaching philosophy and what I envision for my students. And so I just laid it all out on the table. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what I'm about. And if he hires me for this job, he hires me knowing and willing to work with me. Otherwise, he would have picked somebody else. Right. So don't hold back. Whatever's core to you and super important to you, put it out there, and then if they support it, they'll hire you. And you also get a sense when you go into the school. I interviewed at one school, and I just got the vibe, like, ooh, no. So once you get in there, like you said, you kind of get the feeling, and just be honest and open, and if it's a fit, they'll let you know.
Yeah, talk to staff, too. Talk to the cafeteria ladies. They know everything.
The janitors.
The janitors, the secretaries.
Secretaries.
Yeah, no, those food ladies, they know. They got the inside scoop.
And don't be afraid to ask, okay, what is the structure or what is the style of this interview? So at the elementary school where I am, our interviews are group interviews, and so the teachers are there as well. In fact, we even have parents on the panel for some of the interviews. And so knowing that ahead of time can set you up for success as well. So if you could walk into it, like, you know what you're walking into. So is it just going to be me and a couple administrators? Or am I going to walk into a room full of 10 people? Or will it be me and 5 others? Like, having a good idea of that balance. And also, if there's like pre-interview, so administrators can do that part a little bit differently. I know the majority of you are coming from Clark County, so understand what that interview process is like. And if you do happen to have a colleague or a teacher that you know who's at that school, or one who you've been able to develop like a little bit of a relationship with, you can ask what their interview experience was like as well. So beyond the school culture pieces, some of those logistical pieces that you could really benefit yourself from understanding in that capacity.
Okay, so technically you were the last student question. We have one last question. It's my favorite question. For each of the panelists, if you could recommend one thing for our students to read, watch, or listen to, what would it be? So what is the one, it doesn't have to be academic, it could be anything whatsoever, but what is one resource? It can be any media form, but what's one thing that you recommend that our students read, watch, listen to?
Oh, that's such a hard
You
question.
should have asked us that ahead
That
of
should have
time.
been the first question. You know, especially since my talk, you know, I mentioned Paolo Freire a lot today. I would say definitely dig into some of his work. And there's a lot of people that have written, you know, about his work, people who have studied with him. So definitely start with Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I think when I read that book a long, long time ago, it was one of the books that really changed the way I approach teaching. Jeff Duncan Andrade, Professor Duncan Andrade, who's going to be one of your speakers here shortly, I think in April, is that right? He has some wonderful writings that I would strongly recommend, and I'm sure he'll talk about them when he's here, but he also has a fabulous book that, which book did he recommend, do you know yet? Is it the Critical Pedagogy one? Anyway, his work is phenomenal, so anything by Jeff Duncan Andrade and the Paolo Freire, and Jeff Duncan Andrade is very influenced by Paolo Freire and critical pedagogy, so that's where I would send you in that big direction.
That was mine too. Jeffrey Duncan Andrade was my advisor on my PhD committee.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in my research. He influences all of my work. And I just bought a book from him that he published
second one.
last year.
Equity.
You
Equity
can't
or
use the
equality.
same resource?
Sorry, I had it in my head before she said it. It's in my backpack right now. I just started reading it yesterday.
too.
I think it's called Equity versus Equality. And yeah, I would go there.
So before we go there, I think that's the book we're ordering, so don't go out and get that one. Do not go get Equity or Equality. I believe that is the book that you're getting in April, so please do not go out and get that one.
He's a friend, I love him.
And now you all are short a resource because she chose the same resource. I'm not going to ask Rachel to give me two.
I can do two.
Go ahead, give us two.
Okay, so the first one is by one of our UNLV professors, so Dr. Alain Bengochea. If you've had him as your professor so far, raise your hand. Are you at UNLV? Raise your hand. Go find him if you're there, and if not, if you're from NSU, go visit. So he wrote a very short article, The Viability of Dual Language Education in Nevada. So you can get that from him. I can ask to put it in my resource folder, so that'll be one of them. That's a local resource. He's fabulous. And I think he's speaking at the Summit for Education on November 4th in Las Vegas. So when I was planning my session, I was like, hey, Alain, hey, how can I do this? I've only got 25 minutes. He's like, okay, let's, what is it that you want to do and what do you hope they leave with? So we walked through that together, and he actually helped me put in some of the resources in that folder that we have. And then within that same resource folder that I put at the end of my presentation, you can send it out as well, is a document, I don't know the full name, but it's by Ofelia Garcia, and she's one of the leaders in translanguaging and in helping multilingual mindsets and perspectives, and she has a paper in there about who are our English learners, and so you can dive into that document. It is also with an equity lens, so that's two.
Awesome. We are at the end of our Q&A. We would like to thank our fabulous panelists for being here today.
Thank you.
We would like to thank our live streamers for sticking with us through all the ups and downs. We made it. And we would like to thank our fabulous audience.
Yes, it's been great.
And UNR for hosting us here.
Yes, thank you.
1 down, 3 to go. Our next professional development day will be on what day? December 2nd. December 2nd. We will post everything. You got all the information, but December 2nd. Go ahead and mark that down. You're busy that day. All right. Take care and good day.
Thank you.